Camarillo. I'd like to take a moment here and welcome everyone to the City of Camarillo House Enrollment Update Workshop. As a courtesy, I'd like to let everyone know that this workshop is being recorded and will be posted on the project website at CamarilloHouseElement.com. I'd like to take a moment to introduce some of the other members of our team. So we also have Joe Vaca, our Community Development Director, Jackie Lee, Principal Planner, Oksana Buck, Associate Planner, and Monique Martinez, our Senior Administrative Specialist. Also with us, working on the project and the presentation tonight, will be Joe Power, Senior Vice President with Rincon, and Greg Martin, Senior Planner and Project Manager with Rincon Consultants, and Veronica Tam, Principal with Veronica Tam and Associates. Tonight, we'll be giving a presentation on the Housing Element Update Process and an overview of our preliminary land use inventory, and we'll be receiving public comment. So as we mentioned in the noticing for the public workshop, we'll be accepting public comments several ways. First, we'll be allowing our Zoom participants to provide comment via the raise hand button on their screen. When we see your raised hand, we will call you by name, and then you will be prompted to unmute your microphone. And second, we'll also be gathering written comments throughout the presentation, and in the end, we'll be answering them in the order that we received. So now I'd like to turn over the presentation to Greg Martin with Rincon Consultants and Veronica Tam.
Yep, thank you, David. Just share my video there. Thank you. Yeah, hi, my name is Greg Martin. As David said, I'm a Senior Planner and Project Manager with Rincon Consultants. And we're on the consultant team working with the city staff on this housing element update, along with the Veronica Tam. So let me get start the PowerPoint and share my screen. Yeah, sorry. One second, let me make sure I'm sharing the screen. Yes. Okay, thank you. So tonight we will provide a broad overview of the housing element update process and the city's housing needs. Discuss the potential inventory of land available for residential development in the city, and discuss the proposed schedule for the housing element update process and future opportunities for public input. So what are some of the fundamentals of the housing element update process and the fundamentals of housing element update law? And excuse me, I'm going to try to get this a little more set up so I can look straight at it. But tonight, my colleagues and I will provide a broad overview of the housing element update process and the city's housing needs, discuss the potential inventory of land available for residential development, and the schedule. So among all the elements of the city's general plan, the housing element is subject to the most state requirements. It is the only element of the general plan that requires review and certification, which basically means approval by the state. Under state law, the housing element must plan for the provision of a variety of housing types for all income groups and strive to assist in the development of lower and moderate income housing, remove constraints to housing production, conserve and improve existing affordable housing, and promote fair and equal housing opportunities. Also, under state law, the housing element must identify and analyze the community's current and future housing needs, identify adequate sites for housing for for all economic segments of the community, be updated at least once every 8 years, and be consistent with all other elements of the city's general plan. It must include goals, policies, quantified objectives, and scheduled programs for the preservation, improvement, and development of housing. And now I'll hand it over to Veronica Tam of Veronica Tam and Associates, who will discuss new state laws and policy direction regarding the housing element and potential consequences of noncompliance with state housing element law.
Thank you, Greg. This is Veronica Tam with Veronica Tam Associates. As Greg mentioned, the housing element is, oops, what happened to the PowerPoint?
Oh, sorry.
Okay.
Oh, yeah. Are you still?
Can you put it as a slideshow? Yeah. Okay. As Greg mentioned, the housing element really focuses on production of housing, preservation, and improvement of housing. And particularly in recent years, because of the housing crisis that we are facing in California, all the new laws in California have been focusing on facilitating production of new housing by a variety of strategies, including removing constraints to development, increasing density, and expanding housing options. When it comes to removing constraints to development, certainly certain things that the state consider as constraints are the fees and development standards. Reducing fees and establishing objective development standards is important to the state, and streamlining the processing and procedures of housing. And specifically, the state has been moving towards by right approval housing. So as much as possible, they don't like to see conditional use permit type of permit plan approval and permit processing procedures. The other things that, as I mentioned too, is objective standards. You can continue to have site plan reviews, design reviews, but you have to have objective standards for those reviews. Another strategy for increasing housing production is increasing capacity, particularly encouraging higher density development in areas where it's zoned for multifamily development. They're looking for increased density and protecting that density to some extent that you have some minimum threshold for development. Expanding housing options, that's also very important to the state. For example, housing options such as accessory dwelling units, supportive housing for persons with disabilities, and housing for the homeless. These are all the new changes to state law that with the goal of expanding housing choices for the residents. Next slide. The housing element is a little bit different from the rest of the general plan in that it's the only element of the general plan that requires approval by the state agency. The agency responsible for that review is the State Department of Housing and Community Development. When the state identifies a housing element to be non-compliant, it has the authority to refer that agency, that jurisdiction, to the State Attorney General for litigation. The most recent case being the city of Huntington Beach was sued by the Attorney General, and that was probably in 2-3 years ago, and they finally reached settlement agreement last year. The city of Pomona and San Clemente was sued by nonprofits because of their non-compliance. So risk of litigation is a real threat to the housing element, and the housing element is basically practically the most frequently litigated element of the general plan. The other consequence of non-compliance is ineligibility for state laws, such as the SB2 grant. That is a block grant that functions as a block grant that cities are entitled to receive the funding if you apply for it. However, if you do not have a housing element that complies with state law, you're not eligible to apply. The same with the housing trust funds. And also increasingly, infrastructure and transportation funds being administered by the regional governments such as COG and San Diego Council of Governments. Those have the ability to withhold the funding if you do not have a compliant housing element. I think that's the two slides I need to cover.
Great.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Veronica. And can everyone still hear me? Nope. Move on to the next slide, which is in this section we will discuss some basic housing and demographic data relevant to this housing element for, of course, for the city of Camarillo. So as shown on this slide, you can see that most of Camarillo's existing housing stock is single-family units. So in this pie chart here, those are being shown as one unit detached or one unit attached. But putting those together, they represent about 75% of the city's housing stock, with the rest being made up of multifamily units, particularly those with 5 or more units, probably referred to usually as apartment complexes, but then smaller apartments or multifamily units, such as 2 to 4 units or mobile homes. And here we're showing housing stock growth in the last couple of decades for the periods 2000 to 2010, and then our last decade of 2010 to 2020. And basically, the 2000 to 2010 period was a higher growth period for all these communities to one degree or another. And this includes Camarillo and other Ventura County cities of Simi Valley, Thousand Oaks, Fort Hueneme, and Oxnard, and also the county of Ventura, meaning the county as a whole, including all the communities in the county. And as you can see, from 2000 to 2010, Camarillo, the number of housing units in Camarillo grew by 17%, but in the last decade, 2010 to 2020, it only grew by 8%. And so Camarillo was one of the higher growth communities in terms of housing unit growth, at least in that 2000 to 2010 period, and remained also in 2010 to 2020, but that growth did slow down by, it was basically cut in half from 17% to 8%. Other communities that saw growth in housing units, significant growth, included Oxnard, which had numbers that were almost the same as Camarillo. The county as a whole grew by 12% in 2000 to 2010, but then only by 3% in the 2010 to 2020 period. And Fort Hueneme had the lowest growth rate over both decades, with 3% growth in the first decade and 2% growth in the second. And home sale prices, of course, are another important statistic, basically, of measure of affordability, at least for ownership housing. And for the years 2019 and 2020, Thousand Oaks had the highest median home sales price, over around $750,000, stayed pretty steady over those 2 years, followed by Camarillo, Simi Valley, and the county as a whole, with around the same level of somewhere between $550,000 and $600,000. And then Oxnard had a price in both years of around $500,000, and Fort Hueneme was the most affordable, relatively speaking, but also saw some growth in that median home sales price from under $400,000 to about $450,000 in 2020. So household income distribution is also an important concept, and has an important applicability to the Housing Enrollment Update, because for the purposes of the Housing Enrollment Update, the state has established 5 income groups, and we'll refer to those a lot, but it's not arbitrary, and it's established, these percentages are established statewide. Extremely low-income households are households that make no more than 30% of the area median income, or the AMI. And there are very low-income households making no more than 50% of AMI, low-income households making no more than 80% of AMI, moderate-income households making no more than 120% of AMI, and then above moderate-income households making above that 120% of area median income. There's also another group of households that is not legally defined, but typically includes households that make up to 150% of AMI, and that is workforce housing. Workforce housing typically includes unit types such as townhomes, condos, and apartments. These unit types are typically useful for households that have incomes that are too high to qualify for housing assistance, or at least much housing assistance, but their income is not high enough to afford other housing types, such as single-family detached housing, that are available on the open market. Households that spend more than 30% of their income on housing are considered cost-burdened. These households will have less disposable income to spend on other needs, other expenses such as healthcare, for example. Cost burden also impacts extremely low-income households more significantly. In the city of Camarillo, as shown on this slide, 58% of cost-burden renters are considered extremely low income. And for purposes of the housing element, household income is adjusted by household size and adjusted annually. In 2020 in Ventura County, the median income for a household of four is $97,800, as shown on this slide, and that bold number in that table. And now I'd like to discuss the RHNA, the Regional Housing Needs Assessment, and land inventory, and how they relate to the Housing Element Update. So California's population continues to grow, and in response to this growth, and the housing need it creates, the state has created the Regional Housing Needs Assessment Process, or RHNA, and incorporated it into the housing element process. The state does not allocate units directly to Camarillo or other cities or communities individually, at least in Southern California. Rather, it allocates units, or RHNA allocations, to the Southern California Association of Governments, or SCAG, the regional planning agency for Southern California. SCAG is responsible for defining the quote-unquote fair share allocation of the RHNA for its six-county area and the 191 cities it covers in Southern California. The state has determined that the SCAG region needs to accommodate 1,341,827 housing units between 2021 and 2029, so important to note, over that 8-year time period, which is called the housing element cycle, to meet housing demand. And that's not even mentioning any current shortfall in housing units. So the way that process works, to put it or show it another way, is that the state HCD develops the RHNA allocation at the state level, but then passes it down to regional planning agencies like SCAG. And as we said, the allocation for SCAG for that whole 8-year period is 1,341,827 units. But then SCAG divides it up among different counties. And for Ventura County, its RHNA for this period, for the current housing element cycle, is 24,398 housing units. So a much smaller subset of that whole SCAG region allocation. And so for Camarillo and the nearby cities that we've already discussed and provided some statistics for, Simi Valley, Thousand Oaks, Oxnard, and Port Hueneme, the largest allocation among those communities is going to Oxnard at 8,529 units, then Simi Valley at 2,788 units, Thousand Oaks at 2,616 units, then Camarillo 1,372 units, and then Port Hueneme at 125 units. And these allocations were based on growth projections, historical patterns of development, and of course also city size, community size. And so this slide explains how Camarillo's RHNA is assigned to different income groups. As you can see, 508 of Camarillo's 1,372 RHNA units can be accommodated by above moderate income housing, 270 by moderate income housing, 243 by low-income housing, and 351 by very low-income housing. And so the point of these allocations and breaking it down by income category like this is to, goes back to that purpose of the housing element, to try to plan for and zone for housing, the potential for housing affordable to all these income groups, not just a total number of units, but also striving to meet the housing needs of all different economic segments of the community. So under the RHNA process, jurisdictions must plan for the RHNA and zone for adequate sites with appropriate density and development standards, at least 20 dwelling units per acre for lower, it qualify as potentially affordable to lower income categories in Camarillo, and that's actually lower than some other more heavily urbanized areas where the minimum density requirement is higher. And Camarillo's RHNA includes 594 lower income units, in other words, units that need to be within those lower income categories. And this can be accommodated on vacant or underutilized sites, but we need to demonstrate that they have near-term development potential, meaning within the next housing element cycle, the next 8 years starting 2021. And we also need to demonstrate in the housing element that the city's development processes and fees do not unduly constrain housing development. So what are the benefits of a diverse housing stock? Well, the city's current housing stock is primarily single family, as you said, about 75 or 78% single family. And so with a predominantly single family, predominantly ownership, rental housing is in high demand and relatively unaffordable, not just in Camarillo, but throughout California, especially Southern California. So the more diverse housing stock can better accommodate demographic shifts that have happened or are happening and are going to continue to keep happening, such as a decreased number and proportion of children in households, an increase in the number of single households or households headed by single rather than married couples, an increase in seniors living alone. And diversifying the housing stock allows a community to do things like help seniors to age in place, attract young families with children to a community with more affordable housing options, and also to provide housing options for young professionals so that so businesses in the community can attract employees, and so those employees can actually afford to live in or at least near the community. So this slide shows some development of, and some examples of developments in Camarillo at different densities, and how that density relates to the amount of land required to accommodate a certain number of housing units. So, for example, the 594 units in the city's lower income part of its RHNA, at 24 dwelling units per acre, which is shown in the example on the left image, which is from the Pueblo Viejo Apartments project here in Camarillo, that has about 24 units per acre. At that level, it would take 25 acres of land to fit or accommodate 594 housing units of any type. And then the example in the middle is 36 dwelling units per acre, and that picture is from the AMLI Spanish Hills Apartments here in Camarillo, and which does have 36 units per acre. And at that level, it would take 16 acres of land to accommodate 594 housing units. So you can see a significant drop in the actual amount of land that would be required to accommodate that number of units. And then the image on the right is the Cedar Oak mixed-use project in Old Town Camarillo which has 39 dwelling units per acre, plus some commercial on the ground floor. So not a much higher dwelling unit per acre count, but it also incorporates that mixed use component. And at that level, I would take 15 acres of land to accommodate 594 units. So the point of this is not just to show how many units we can fit on, or how much land it would take to accommodate that number of units, but also, of course, the less land it takes, the less expensive it is to develop the housing, because land costs are high. That's a fixed cost. And so the more units you can put on a site, or the less land you need to accommodate a certain number of units, then you can drive down or lower that fixed cost for each housing unit and have the potential, at least, to make the housing more affordable. So the city is required in its housing element to develop a land inventory of sites that have zoning and other conditions that would allow for the production of housing, including across those different income categories. And it's important to note that this is not a construction mandate. The city is not required to build the housing. It's still up to housing developers, either private market or nonprofit or whoever, but the city needs to plan for it and zone for it. And so we are taking a look at the potential sites for the land inventory for the city, and that's shown on this map. And basically, there are several different kinds of sites that we're looking at, entitled projects that have not been built yet, and you can see that's parcels or sites in orange, including a large area over in the Springville area, and then down somewhere around Lewis Road, both south and north of the 101. And then also vacant sites, and there are some of those basically on the periphery of the community, both on the west side, the northeast, and a little bit on the west side of downtown or heading out towards Springville. And then also there are redevelopment sites, and that basically means that there's already development on the site, but we can identify a potential for future development on these sites based on factors such as the amount of development, the amount of buildings and building coverage on the site, but also building age, the age of the development, in zoning, of course, and whether or not more development can be accommodated on the site under existing zoning. And then we also look at other factors such as owner interest and other factors such as that. So, looking at all those sites that are shown on that previous map, we currently project that 1,500 total housing units could be accommodated on those sites, and we assign them to different income categories based on a variety of factors, and so that's 128 more units than is in the city's current RENA. When you look at it by income category, we think that 732 of the sites and the units that could be accommodated in that land inventory would be in the very low or low income category. It could be, and that gives us a surplus of 138 units. And you can see there's a little bit of a shortfall currently, or projected shortfall in the moderate income category, 77 units, and a surplus again of 67 units in the above moderate income category. And we will be refining this land inventory as we proceed through the Housing Enrollment Update process. We need to demonstrate that there is realistic development potential on every site in the land inventory. They'll all be shown in tables in the Housing Update. We'll be submitting those to each CD. So we need to provide justification for the realistic development potential on these sites within the next housing element cycle, meaning the next 8 years starting after 2021 or in 2021. So we may, or we probably will be identifying or looking at additional sites to either make up for any shortfall created if some of the current sites are deemed infeasible for development in the next cycle, but also to develop a buffer, so to speak, because if we identify sites in our land inventory and then they develop during the next housing element cycle, but they develop with something other than housing, for example, or if we identify a lower number of housing units, or if we identify them as potentially being able to accommodate units in the very low or low income categories, and instead it develops with all market rate, then if that makes our land inventory fall below a level eventually of the RENA, then that's a problem. So we need to build in some a little bit of extra number of units or buffer, so to speak, to account for future growth and development and build in that buffer. So what are the next steps in this process? Well, our schedule, basically we're currently in the data and analysis phase of the housing element update, including that land inventory, but also the preparation of the housing element update itself, including needs assessment, and also then we'll be moving in after that into goals and policies and assessing the success of the city's policies from the previous housing element. We're also in the citizen participation phase currently, and we think that we'll be in that through about November. There will be future opportunities and current opportunities for public input, including ongoing through city's website and other methods, and I'll talk about that in the next slide. But also future public workshops and Planning Commission and City Council joint study sessions. And we'll wrap that up in about November and the end of November, and produce a draft housing element for consideration by the Planning Commission and City Council. Take that to them in January. Take it to them with public hearings in January. And then send the draft housing element to HCD. Under state law, they review it, assess its compliance with state housing element law, and they can comment and make requests to the city. And during that time, we'll also be doing the environmental clearance for the project, which means, in this case, CEQA, or the California Environmental Quality Act, going through that process. And then after we have the back and forth with HCD, we're preliminarily planning on taking the draft housing element back to Planning Commission and City Council in June of 2021, and that would include any edits that were made to address HCD comments. Once the City Council adopts the housing element, the final housing element, HCD would review that adopted housing element and then certify it, as long as they agree that it complies with state housing element law. So, what are some ways to provide input throughout this housing element update process, more specifically? You can provide written input via the project website, www.camarillohousingelement.com. You can email the Community Development Department at planning@cityofcamarillo.org. You can provide verbal input via the project hotline, which is a recorded message only, at 805-388-5372. You can call community development staff and speak to them at 805-388-5360. And you can also join the email list to stay up to date on the project by visiting the city's website at www.cityofcamarillo.org/community_relations. And you can attend future public meetings and workshops. And to find out the dates for those, visit the project website, again, www.camarillohousingelement.com for information on those future public meetings and workshops. So thank you very much. And we really do want public input in this process. It's your community and your general plan, your housing element. So again, I'll leave this slide up. It includes the phone number for city staff and also the project website.
Thank you, Greg and Veronica, for your presentation. We will now take public input via our Zoom raise hand feature. So if you'd like to speak, please click on the raise hand button on your screen. We will call on you individually, and you will be prompted to unmute your microphone. At that time, provide your comment, and then we will move to the next person. I'll turn the presentation over to Oksana Buck right now, and so she can call the first person.
Thank you, David. We have not received any requests from the public to speak by phone. And we have one attendee who has raised his hand who would like to make a comment. Stevie D. If you could go ahead and unmute yourself and make your comment or ask your questions now.
Good afternoon. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Great. My name is...
Steve, I think your microphone remuted. Could you unmute it, please?
That's weird. Sorry about that. My name is Steve Du Bois. I live in the Meadows on the road to Somas. And I have a master's degree in urban and regional planning from the University of Michigan. And I'm commenting specifically on one aspect of the presentation that I just heard, which was that 601 units of very low and low income housing is going to be put in all of the redevelopment sites. And I think that is counterproductive. I'd like to know, A, why there's not a mix of housing types going into the redevelopment areas so that people of different income levels can get to know one another. And also, is there a plan to do mixed use in any of these areas so that your housing can be above businesses of retail and office? The reason I ask the question is that many studies have shown that to get people up out of the level of low and very low incomes, they need to know people that are in different income strata above that so that they can get better jobs. Because oftentimes to get better jobs, it's who you know, not what you know. So that's the rationale behind my query. Thank you.
Should I address that? I'm asking the city.
Yes, please.
Okay. Well, let me say that the redevelopment sites is largely in, or identified as redevelopment in the potential land inventory. Let me maybe see if I can go back a slide. I'm not sure if I can do that right now. Okay. Well, yeah. Are you seeing the slides changing?
Yes.
So, right. So yes, you're correct that in the redevelopment sites there were many that are identified as affordable to or potentially affordable to very low or low income households. But in these areas, this is potentially affordable, and the actual development that would happen would be up to the developers, property owners, but in cooperation with the city. And in these areas, for example, in the Camarillo Commons area, which, let's see here, sorry to jump around, but I'll try to go back to there we go. The land inventory sites map, there's right below the word Camarillo on that map, much of that blue is the Camarillo Commons area, and I believe the city does have a specific plan, or has made plans for that area before. And yes, there's definitely potential for mixed use or housing above commercial. And so what develops in that area wouldn't be dictated by just the land inventory table or the land inventory of the housing element, but also the city's plans for the area that it already has developed or will develop, and also market forces. But that's also part of the reason why we can look into potentially changing the the way we're showing those allocations, if we don't think, or the community doesn't think, or the city doesn't think it's realistic to show them that way. But also, that's another reason to find some additional sites, possibly. So if that area didn't develop exactly the way we're assuming it would, or we're showing it would in the land inventory, that we could then have other sites yet to have that surplus, where other housing units and those income levels could potentially develop.
If this is Veronica, if I can elaborate on that. The site inventory is not saying that that's how many low income, moderate income, above moderate income going in any particular area. What the state law is using is density as a proxy to feasibility for building certain types of housing. So what we were showing earlier is that at the density available in those areas, it's feasible to build lower income housing without a substantial amount of subsidies that would put the development beyond possible. And so that's, it can, just like Craig said, it can be something mixed use, it can be mixed income, it can be upper income. It just depends on what the developer is going to ultimately propose. But the density is being used by state law as a proxy for development potential for lower income, given that all lower income housing will require some kind of subsidies, but at a higher density, the level of subsidies required would not be prohibitive.
And if I could just jump in, just to be crystal clear, I mean, just to make sure, that number you're seeing in the table there, this 672, I think it was, that's based on the density. In other words, that's where 20 units an acre or more, not that that's all is subsidized affordable housing. It just meets that density, so that the state defines it as affordable.
So hopefully that addresses your question.
Yes, thank you. You answered the question, although I find the way that the state defines things rather baffling. However, that's because I'm not practicing here. So thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. The next speaker we have is Eric. Eric, if you can go ahead and unmute your microphone.
Hi all, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
So related to this topic about the 601 low-income units that were possibly or could have been developed on this redevelopment site, as Veronica clarified, that, at least to me, and correct me if I'm wrong, that appeared to be the development that would be the farthest in the future. While in contrast to that, we have 418, wealthier units that are already entitled and set to be built earlier in the future. This, in my opinion, seemed to be like the opposite of what we should be doing in terms of addressing actual priorities, which the clear priority in Ventura County and most all of Southern California is to increase affordable housing stock and housing stock that is accessible to people of lower income levels. So especially if we want to be achieving the goal of providing housing options for young professionals, for example, who are usually making lower than area median income, then it seems that we should maybe be reconsidering the allocation of units for developments that are most early in the future, that are set to be developed most soon in the future. In terms of shifting those units to be increasingly for lower income brackets is what I'm trying to say.
Yes, no, Eric, I hear you loud and clear, and we agree with you. I mean, unfortunately, we can only zone for the property, and a developer would have to come in and actually build the project. So But we are taking a more proactive approach to our affordable housing at the city of Camarillo. We have recently purchased 2 parcels in the city, one on O'Neill and one on Berry Street. And we are actually the driving force of that development. So if you're familiar with the old stock lumber yard, the city has purchased that property, and we're actually building what we think is more of a model style of development, which has your rental, ownership, and special needs units all in the same complex. And then we also have another property that we're on Arneal Street, a long-time vacant property, and we're going to be putting 9 units there for very extremely low income. So we are the driving force on those 2. Unfortunately, that's all the money we have. We'd do more if we had more funding, and we are continuing to search for funding, and we've recently applied for and received, I think it was 5 or 6 grants to help further those goals.
Yeah, I guess in response to that, in terms of like finding funding and such, there's a very sizable chunk of our overall general fund budget that goes to fund our police force that may or may not be needed for those services, and is definitely needed for such things as housing in Camarillo. So I would make that suggestion. But then previously in the presentation, I also noted that the allocation according to the RENA has about 351 of the, correct me if I had the things wrong, extremely low income units, and then very low income units, or sorry, I have the terms definitely wrong, but 351 and 243 of these lower income units, which totaled out to 594, and then 270 and 508 units that totals out to 778, which, if you just look at the disparity there's already this increased allocation for units for folks that do not need housing because they're wealthy. You know what I mean? So like we're already allocating 778 units of our RENA to folks that don't need the help. Like we need people, like people are going to be homeless, like on the street from COVID. And so we need affordable housing units so desperately. And we already have this allocation that is not commensurate with what our priorities actually are.
If I can respond to that, David, the regional housing needs allocation is not a maximum, it's a minimum. And so if you have the ability to do more, certainly. But what is also important is when it comes to affordable housing, we're really dealing with just very low, and moderate income. We're not dealing with the above moderate income. But we do need housing for everybody. That's what state law particularly says, that we have to provide housing for all income groups. And you do need housing for everybody, whether they're upper income or not. There is a need for housing, but there is just no subsidies to go into housing those jurisdictions. Again, we're really just using density as a proxy to the kind of income affordability level. I'll give you an example. If you go to in the Imperial County, above moderate income housing can be anywhere, but low income housing can be single family homes as well. It just depends on the market. And the city is not going to be the developer in most cases, except in certain cases the city would facilitate the lower income. So housing has to be brought on by the developer. The market developer can be affordable developer, can be market rate developer. We don't know what that's going to fall. And if somebody has enough funding, they can do the sites that we call it as feasible for above moderate income. It's essentially the lower intensity sites because they are more expensive per unit basis, so they're less likely to be feasible for lower income. But if a developer comes in and has a lot of money, a nonprofit, and they want to build affordable single-family homes, go for it. There's nothing in the general plan or in the city's policy to go against it. But from a financial feasibility standpoint, is not likely that like single-family homes could be made feasible, financially feasible for lower income. But again, it's not that the city doesn't allocate these funds, these units into different income categories. These are allocated by the regional government based on income distribution, and the city of Camarillo already has a quote-unquote, I would call it penalty. Your current income distribution is actually means even higher towards the high income. But in order to compensate for the fact that you have a lower percentage of low-income households currently in the city, your RENA is actually being added a correction factor towards the lower income. But these income distribution is based on the census income distribution with the correction factor, and it's not something that the city as a local jurisdiction has the ability to influence.
That seems a little bit problematic, in my opinion. But
I think the whole regional housing needs allocation process is a very debatable system. There's been a lot of discussions. Is there a way to fix it? But any system like that is going to have its flaw, and it's been moving to, like, every cycle they update our housing element, they work towards correcting certain factors and changing and improving the system. But there's always there are always issues that we have to deal with.
Hey, Eric, did you have any additional questions or comments?
If there's somebody else with a hand raised, then I'll go ahead and stop talking. But if there's nobody else with a hand raised, then I would just like to share a couple more words about what we were just discussing with Veronica.
Yes, go ahead. We don't have any other hands raised at the moment.
Okay. Yeah, I guess just in response to what Veronica was clarifying, thank you for doing so. I guess I would just invite us to think critically about, I understand that these allocations of the way that I had divided it previously, with 594 potential allocations being for lower income units, whereas 778 being for higher income units. I guess I would just invite us to think about, even with this correction factor built into our RENA allocations, what does housing do? It keeps people from being homeless, and it's a human right for people to not have to be forced onto the street. You know what I mean? And so I'm trying to say, at the end of the day, what's our priority? Is our priority helping our neighbors be housed and having them have a decent life in the form of not being homeless? And if so, then we should be thinking about what's actually what we can do to make sure that actually becomes reality.
Okay, thank you for your comments, Eric. And at this time, we do not see any additional hands raised, and we also have not received any questions or comments through the Q&A feature.
Okay, well, thank you, everyone. Seeing there's no further public input, this concludes our workshop tonight. In closing, can we put up the slide where it shows all the ways that we can provide input throughout the process, please? All right, thank you. So this is a fluid process as we go through and update our housing element, and we are taking public input.
It seems that we lost internet connection with David. David was just going through the slide that talks about different ways that you can provide input throughout the entire housing element process. Again, you're welcome to visit our project website anytime at camarillohousingelement.com. You can submit your comments by email to planning@cityofcamarillo.org. You can call our project hotline at 805-388-5372. You can call community development staff at 805-388-5360. And you can join our email list by visiting www.cityofcamarillo.
Oh, there we go.
Oh.
All right, go ahead, Oksana. Thank you.
.org/community_relations. And again, visit the project website for information on upcoming input opportunities.
All right, well, thank you again, everyone. And I look forward to working with you in the future as we move through this process to update the housing element. Thank you. Good night.
Thank you, everybody. Great job, team.
Good night.